Good morning. Welcome to another segment of the Financially Speaking Show. I almost say Draxel Seema Show, the Financially Speaking Show. And it's my honor to have Her Excellency, the Deputy Governor, Anya Williams, here with us. Of course, she's head of civil service. We want to primarily talk about the recent salary review, pay grade, and of course, we're going to talk about any other issues or factors or improvements that are being done in the civil servants department. Throughout the government, public sector department, I should say. And with that said, of course, this is not a first time here, probably a third time here. I want to take this opportunity to welcome you to the show. Thank you.
Morning, and it's always a pleasure being here on Financially Speaking, and welcome back to the radio airwaves. I know it's been some time, so we're happy to have you back and always happy to be a guest on the show.
Yes. Now we're gonna, how are you doing, by the way?
I'm doing well. It's end of financial year, so of course it's a very, very busy time for us.
Oh yes, March 31st.
Yes, March 31st. We are doing our best to deliver on our objectives and for government to deliver on its program across the various ministries and departments across government. So very, very busy time across the public service. A lot of improvements taking place, but happy to be here to share with you and the public some of the work that we're doing.
Awesome. So let's go to the meat of our conversation. Take us back now to the salary review. I think it was released sometime in November, I believe, which was done by Ernst & Young.
Yes.
Out of Jamaica. Tell us about that, the background to that, and tell us about the findings and overall finding. We'll take it from there.
Sure. So on December 1st, 2023, the Turks and Caicos government implemented a new pay and grading structure across government. This is actually the second pay and grading program that we've done since my tenure as Deputy Governor. I was appointed on October 15, 2012, and one of the first objectives that my office had was actually to work towards improving public servants' pay. During the interim administration, public servants across government had suffered a 10% pay cut. And so one of the first things that my office did was work towards reinstating that 10%. And so we reinstated the 10% pay cut, but then also we requested through the United Kingdom that we undertake a comprehensive pay and grading review across government. And so in 2012, we embarked on a new pay and grading review, and that was implemented in 2014. And then in 2015, we implemented an across-the-board 2.5% salary increase for all public servants. So the last time that the public service has actually received a pay increase was in 2015. The pay and grading in 2014, and a small pay increase of 2.5% in 2015. Now, several years passed since 2015. We know the economy has changed. We know that we've had the COVID-19 pandemic, and we've also had inflation increase around the world. And so the Turks and Caicos was in a position where certainly in the public service, pay did not match actual responsibilities and certainly was not competitive with the private sector or with other governments. And as a result of that, we were struggling to recruit key positions. And so one of the objectives that we worked on with the current government is to not only look at public servants' pay, but also benefits. And so
the overall package.
The overall package of compensation to employees. And so we worked first on benefits because we know that during the interim administration as well, public servants' pension and gratuities had been suspended. We know the government had two different programs because employees that were employed pre-April 1992, they were in receipt of a gratuity and a pension program under that program. But all public servants that joined the public service after 1992 did not have in place a pension or gratuity program. And so that meant that if you left the public service, whether through retirement or through untimely passing, or if you were terminated, you had basically zero benefits. All you would receive is your vacation pay. And so for many years, we had been working to establish a new pension and gratuity program for public servants. And on April 1st, 2022, we implemented a new pension and gratuity program for post-1992 employees. And that program provides all post-1992 employees with a 6% pension and gratuity. It is a contributory program, which means that employees are to contribute 3% and the employers to contribute 2%. But because of the hardship that public servants were experiencing at the time, the government covered the full cost. So the government covered the full 6% for all employees.
And this will be continuous?
Continuous.
Oh, okay.
So the government provided the full 6% for all employees. And in addition to that, government provided all employees with a 4% across the board salary increase. Because we know that NIB had also increased its rate progressively by 1% during the past few years. So we didn't want our public servants to face any financial loss, and so the government provided a 10% increase in pay and benefits, 6% to cover the pension and gratuity program, and 4% to cover other costs. And that was done in April 2022. Still continuing to work on pay and benefits, we then looked at how we looked at individual salaries. The COVID-19 pandemic was a challenge for the public service in Turks and Caicos and elsewhere. You lost many employees, as well as persons did not want to enter certain fields. And so some of the areas that we were really struggling with was teaching. You know, many teachers unfortunately passed away. Some left the classroom. America,
and some left the country.
Some left the country. America implemented a new compensation package for teachers where they were offering basic salaries of around $60,000 as well as status. So that attracted a lot of persons to the United States. And so our primary recruitment market is actually in Jamaica. And you would have seen that Jamaica lost over 400 teachers over a certain period with persons moving to the United States. Here in the Turks and Caicos Islands, we continue to promote teaching as a key priority area for us for studies. I mean, it's one of the areas where we guarantee scholarships every year. But unfortunately, our take-up is not as high as we need it to be, because we're opening new public schools. We are increasing the size of our classrooms because more persons want to get their children into public schools because of our quality of education and learning. But we're struggling to match the numbers in terms of local teachers. And so teaching became a real challenge for us to recruit. The same with nurses and doctors and so on. We're also encouraging Turks and Caicos Islanders to pursue those areas. But generally across government, it became a challenge for us because our pay was unmatched compared to the private sector and to other countries. And so we undertook to carry out a pay and grading review. My office did not do it on our own because we wanted it to be independent. We wanted it to be objective. We wanted to really look at the market. And so we signed a contract with Ernst & Young Caribbean, which is based in Jamaica. They had previous experience carrying out similar reviews in Jamaica and elsewhere. And they undertook to carry out a market survey. And they looked at countries like Cayman, Bermuda, BVI, Jamaica, also the private sector here in Turks and Caicos. And I want to thank those private sector companies here in Turks and Caicos that graciously provided us with their pay data and allowed us to be able to compare rates. There were some companies that refused. I will say that they didn't want government to have information because they felt like we would become their competitor. But we got very good results in terms of the market survey. And based on that, we were able to undertake a review and to make certain recommendations regarding a new pay structure for staff across government.
And that salary, I mean, before I go there, I know the private sector, I did a salary review as well for at least two statutory bodies. And it's a challenge sometimes getting help from the private sector.
It is.
They don't respond. They don't even acknowledge your email.
No.
But they want you to help them with other things, but they don't want to provide the information. I assure them that information will be confidential.
Yes.
Because I wouldn't even reveal who it is.
Yes.
But they didn't supply any information.
We did the same. We provided confidentiality agreements. We agreed that we would not share the information, that even if they didn't want me to see personally the information, they could have given it to the consultants, but there were many companies that opted not to participate. But there were some of the law firms on the island, they did provide the information. Some of the law firms did, some of the banks did, but some of the other private sector, some of the hotels did as well, but others that we would have liked to participate didn't.
So based on the Ernst & Young findings, the salary range from what, 10% to what?
So we guaranteed that we believe that every person across government has suffered some form of financial hardship during the past few years. And so we did a minimum guarantee that every member of staff across government would receive a minimum 10% salary increase. And so every member of staff at minimum received a 10% increase on their base pay. And then in addition to that, we looked at other areas where the increases were a bit higher. The pay and grading review in total cost $18.1 million. That is the single largest investment that has ever been made in public service pay.
So 18.1 million is what the impact would have been.
Yes, that's what the annual
the
impact.
Increased cost was $18.1 million.
$18.1 million. So we increased our payroll cost by 22%, which amounted to $18 million. Of that $18 million, $13 million was actually dedicated to 4 sectors. And those sectors were healthcare, education, policing, and frontline officers. And then when we went into those 4 areas, the largest increase actually went into the Ministry of Education. So the Ministry of Education is our largest employment sector. We have around 400 persons that are employed in the teaching sector. But in that sector, the minimum increase was over 20%. And so graduate teachers received a 25 to 28% salary increase. Principals received a 40% salary increase, and vice principals 40%, and principals received a 57% salary increase. And so we were very deliberate about that sector because teaching impacts all careers.
Oh,
Teaching impacts
absolutely.
every career.
Absolutely.
And so I know that there were persons that were not happy with the increases in the teaching sector. I had persons that rang my office afterwards and said, how could you pay a teacher more than what you're paying a senior head of a department or someone who has a degree in this area? And we said to them, we were very deliberate about that because teaching impacts all careers. It is an area where Turks and Caicos right now, we are outnumbered because we don't have the local capacity. We want to attract more persons, more local persons in the area. And we also want to retain persons there, because what was happening is that a lot of persons that were employed in the teaching sector were actually trained teachers. Trained Turks Island teachers were leaving because they wanted better pay elsewhere. And so what we're trying to do is not only attract persons to the sector, but to retain them there. In addition to the teaching sector, we also had increases in the healthcare sector of over 20%. The police had actually had the 10% increase in 2022 because they got the 6% gratuity, they got the 4% across the board, and then in 2022, and then in December 2022, because of the increase in crime, government gave the police an extra 10% increase on their pay. And then so the police had recently had a 14% across the board salary increase, but in addition to that, at the lowest level for constables, we gave an 18% salary increase. So police salaries in the last 3 years would have been increased by over 30% at the lowest level, going up to about 50%. And so policing was another area, but then the other area we focused on was frontline officers. And when I say frontline officers, I'm speaking to customs, immigration, road safety, prison, fire, those areas. And those persons also had a 20% salary increase. I remember when I took on this role as deputy governor, just over 11 years ago or so, immigration officers were complaining that they weren't even taking home $2,000 a month. The salary was less than $24,000. We've now increased the salary for immigration, customs, and other officers to the lowest salary starts at around $38,000. And in addition to that, they also receive allowances. We know right now that we're dealing with the irregular migration situation from Haiti. And so for our task force officers that work on the front line, they all receive a task force allowance. And we increased that amount by 100%, from $500 a month to $1,000 per month. So basically, we're looking at how we are able to better remunerate our staff. And it's not just about pay, because I think people think that it's just about money. It's not about money. It's actually about not only paying someone appropriately, but actually helping to retain those persons in the posts that they are in, but also attracting new persons to those roles. The Turks and Caicos economy is growing, and as a result of that, the government sector has to grow as well, because we're responsible for providing so many basic needs. And so we have to ensure that we're hiring the right persons in the public sector, and that we're no longer competing with the private sector, that the best goes to the private sector, and whoever can't be hired by the private sector then comes on to government. We want government to be the employer of choice.
Absolutely. So speaking about this, right, because I ran into, I like getting people business, because I write articles, so I get into business. Not intentionally, but maybe I do, I don't know. So I ran into a few employees, because from time to time I go to departments to do some transactions when my courier is not available. And so I went to this particular department. I say, man, you guys are doing well. You got this great. You know what they told me? They didn't feel anything. They said what happened was that their allowances were what word to use? Were built into their new salary. So they said they didn't see any increase in their pay. So they're saying they say it was misleading. That's what they're saying.
So that's absolutely not the case, because even we did look at allowances. The reason why we looked at allowances and we incorporated allowances into basic pay is because when you are calculating your terminal benefits are only calculated on your base pay, not on your allowances. And so what it meant for many persons is that because a lot of their salary, they were getting a salary and then they were getting a professional allowance, a Provo. Every person in Provo before got a $200 a month Provo allowance. Because you were getting a Provo allowance.
Everybody?
Because everyone in Provo previously, because they got that for years before, because it was stated that Provo was a harder market to recruit.
Cost of living higher?
Cost of living was higher.
Oh.
But we know that that's now changed, because people in South Caicos may say to you that food in South Caicos costs more than it does in Provo. And people in Grand Turk may say that they have other concerns rather than Provo. We know that Provo has a housing crisis, and so rent, of course, here is more expensive. But what was happening is that a person we wanted to look at how we are able to better increase your basic pay, because that is where your terminal benefits are calculated.
And the terminal benefits is the pension plan?
Your pension program, your gratuity. And the reason why that's necessary is because if you were used to making $4,000 a month the entire time you were employed, because that included your allowances, but the date that you retire, your 6% is only calculated on your base pay.
Got it.
It means that your monthly, your gratuity and your pension is going to be far lower than what you were taking home before. And so we incorporated then a lot of allowances into basic pay. But even after we did that, we still guaranteed you the minimum 10%.
I see.
So you still got the minimum 10%.
I see. So, okay. So really, so what you're saying that even though you incorporated the allowances into the basic salary, on top of that, individuals still got 10%.
You still got a minimum 10%.
So the 10% didn't include just incorporating the allowances.
No, it didn't.
Ah.
And so if you were in a point before where if you were, let's say you were at grade 5.1, because we have a 11 point, we had previously had a 10-point grade structure. We increased that to 11 now, and then we added 3 executive grades, which includes the permanent secretaries, deputy secretaries, and even myself. We're all in grades now. But if you were at 5.1 before, and now when we incorporate your allowances to give you that 10%, you would then move even if it's to 5.3, but to make sure that you keep your allowance, you have your allowances, and you have the 10% increase in pay. So everyone got a minimum. No one got less than 10%.
All right,
Absolutely no one.
That's good to know. That's why, always good to hear two sides of the story.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm quite sure people should even look at their page, because they get a pay slip,
you
right?
Get your pay slip. You do get your pay slip.
And the pay slip could show them that they're taking home more than what they was taking home before.
I think every person is taking home more than what they did before. But then I encourage persons to look at your individual circumstances rather than looking at what someone else is receiving, because there was also the argument that we had from staff that said we should be paid more because we work in Provo compared to persons that work in other islands, because
they
don't have their workload is higher. But at the same time, you have to look at the attractiveness of that. So we had an argument that said I should be paid more as a teacher in Provo because my classroom size is bigger than North Caicos or South Caicos. But at the same time, if you were to increase the pay for Provo and to lower the pay for the other islands, how do you attract talent to those islands? Because everyone will then want to come to Provo because the pay is higher, rather than looking at the other islands. And those islands, while they may have smaller classrooms, they're catering to different needs, because in Providenciales, where we may have certain resources that are available, they may not be available in the outer islands. And so that teacher that's teaching a classroom with 10 students may actually have to be catering to more needs with those 10 students than what you're doing in the class with 18, because you have teaching assistants or other support. It's the same thing with immigration officers. The immigration officers said, we have international flights and they don't have international flights, so we should be paid more than them. But I mean, we're one Turks and Caicos, and we're really looking at the job rather than the individual workload. If officers have to work additional hours, we offer overtime and so on, but it's really looking at a pay structure that fits the entire Turks and Caicos.
And I think that's how it should be. I mean, imagine now you working in Provo. Okay, people arguing for this, right? You working in Provo, and say you get transferred to Middle North. Would you want your salary to be reduced because you say, "Oh, the workload is"? No, nobody wants that.
Then no one would want to go to those islands to work, and so you're going to be then decreasing the population and the workforce on those islands, because no one will want to go to those islands because the pay is far less.
And then you're paying really for the position.
Yes, you're paying for the qualifications, and you're paying for the position and the role, and then also times are going to change. Those islands it's our intention that every island in Turks and Caicos becomes developed, to the manageable extent, and that the demand on those islands are going to increase in time as well.
Right. Now, I know you mentioned the minimum pay for, I think, the customs and
immigration.
And you said it was $38,000.
Yes.
What is the minimum pay for the government? Or what is the minimum pay rate now? Any department in government?
So we know that we increased minimum wage also. So minimum wage had previously increased, I believe, from $6.50 to $8.50 per hour, $9 for security officers, and $10.
I think $8. Yeah.
Yeah. So the minimum pay across government is set at above the minimum wage level, and so we start with cleaners and security officers and so on. And so those pay structures at grade 1 would basically be below that level. I believe that amount is, I think we changed that amount to around between $1,400 to $1,500 per month. That should be the lowest salary across government.
Lowest, and that's more like.
That's our ancillary staff, our
Ancillary
wage staff. Yeah, our
okay.
bi-weekly paid staff.
What were they getting before? Do you know? Do you remember?
So they had an increase of about 30% in pay.
Okay.
They had an increase of about 30% in pay because we really wanted to look at the persons that were feeling the most hardship. You know, their pay is less than many others, and of course you want to make sure that they can take home a certain level of pay that can at least provide them with some basic level of
Right.
Of finances. To
Right.
support
And
their
those
lifestyle.
staff there, they don't really work 9 to 5, right?
No, they work on a shift system, most of them. So they work on a shift system. They don't work 9 to 5, but they may work, you know, alternative hours. They may come in earlier and leave a bit later, but those are our ancillary staff, like our cleaners, our security,
got it.
our groundsmen, our porters, and so on.
Okay,
Yeah.
I got it.
But
Now,
the
now
first-
during, go ahead.
So the first, we have an 11-point structure. So that would be grade 1. In
The
terms of
ancillary staff is grade
yes,
1.
grade 1.
Okay.
Grade 2 is a bit more of the ancillary staff, but at a more senior level, I would say. And then grade 3 is really where we start our clerical and our administrative staff, and that's where the grades start to go from there. From grade 6 is where we have our staff that basically those are the positions that require, we say like a first degree or trained staff, and those positions start at grade 6, and those positions now have moved to around $45,000 to $48,000 per annum starting pay.
Okay. I was really excited when I saw the teaching, the review of the education department, because I know a lot of times we take that field for granted. I mean, throughout the world, it's like they're getting the lowest paid, you know, not the lowest paid, one of the lowest paid. And so I was very happy to see that the government focused on making them one of the top priorities. Of course, that's a challenge now for the private sector.
It is.
Because the private sector schools now are losing some of their teachers to the public sector, because the
Yes.
private sector is paying lower, except maybe two or three schools. Majority of private schools are paying less than the government
Yes.
right now.
Yes.
But I'm happy for the teachers and the principals.
So we had teachers, I mean, I can tell you that there are teachers that have shared their experiences. And I had a teacher in particular that came to me and said, you know, that she's been in the teaching sector for 30 years. And that when she came into the teaching sector, her take-home pay was less than $1,500 a month.
Really?
And now she started 30 years
Oh
ago.
yeah, 30 years.
Yeah. And she was saying that now, you know, to see where teachers are, she's so happy that she can at least retire on a decent salary, that when she has her pension and so on calculated, she would have something that she is able to, you know, sustain her and her family throughout her retirement period. But then also, you know, the teaching sector is one where, I mean, it feeds into every area. You have
Everywhere.
to make sure that you get the right persons in the classrooms. And so we were very, very deliberate about the teaching sector. I know that there were some persons that were not happy with that. I had persons that complained that, oh, you're paying teachers, you're paying principals almost $80,000 a year.
They deserve it.
What about, and my argument to that is, you can't pay someone who's in a school with over 300, 400 students. I mean, when you look at schools like Long Bay High and Clement Howell and even HJ that have hundreds of students, I mean, the level of risk and responsibility that those persons take in terms of safeguarding and other responsibilities, they earn every dollar of that.
Yeah. And they're not only dealing with the students, they got to deal with the parents. You know, parents going to come and see them, talk to them, complain to them, talk about them. They have a lot, and then all the different personalities.
Yes.
It's a lot of different things they have to. I appreciate teachers.
I do too. I appreciate teachers. I appreciate all staff across government, but teachers, healthcare workers, and so on, in frontline officers, those are the persons that really carry your country.
Yeah.
And so you have to make sure that you have the right persons in those roles. Otherwise, you're just not going to get the results that you want.
Yeah. Now, I know you mentioned the health, right? And I know that we have the Turks and Caicos hospitals, which is contracted. Now, the increase in the health, that's for the Ministry of Health.
Yes.
So does that mean that the employees at the Turks and Caicos Hospital didn't get any increase?
So the employees at the Turks and Caicos Hospital, even those that would have left government years ago to join the hospitals, they're on separate pay packages, which are by the hospital. And so the hospital would have to undertake its own review
I see.
and so on. But you remember that the hospital is still charging government on a cost plus basis.
Yes, they are.
So whatever charges that they make and whatever expenses they have in terms of salaries or other costs, they will charge us not only for those costs, but also a percentage on top of that. So I am not sure of what the current salaries are in the InterHealth Canada structure because they would have their own pay, but I know our structure is only just for us. But we have had, I think for us, we're looking at also how we balance it between the public and private sector because just like you mentioned earlier about the education sector, we have had private schools that have written to the Ministry of Education saying we are losing teachers because our teachers now want to move to the public
really?
sector. And we now need to know.
expected that.
And so some private schools are actually asking the government to subsidize their schools because they're saying that if government doesn't give them more grants, it means that they will then have to raise school fees and
Yes.
that it's going to impact parents. But I want persons to be aware that government currently does provide subsidies to a lot of private schools. So government government doesn't charge any fees at all for work permits for any teachers in the Turks and Caicos Islands. So teachers, if you have a private school, there's no work permit or other fees that are charged by government. But in addition to that, government has also been subsidizing schools by providing additional teachers, where government covers the cost for additional teachers, which allows us to have a certain number of placements in private schools, as well as government has been covering the cost for certain students to be enrolled in private schools because we don't have the classroom space at some of our schools.
But not every private school is enrolled in that program.
Not every
though.
private school, no. It's those schools it's those private schools that opt to be a part of it.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. Now, what about the statutory bodies? This review was just. Did this review include the statutory bodies?
This review included the subvented statutory bodies, those that receive
get
a monthly
subvention.
subvention. But now we're moving into the second phase of this review, which is going to include the statutory bodies. And the reason why it's going to include the statutory bodies is because not only because we want to ensure that persons that work in the statutory bodies also receive fair compensation, but because over the years, many of the statutory bodies have implemented their own salary reviews, and that's
Yes.
really caused issues across government in terms of parity amongst pay structures. So in the Cayman Islands, they undertook a review and they put all statutory bodies actually on a scale. So what they have is that you have certain positions, and they would say if it's CEO, they have CEO 1, CEO 2, and CEO 3, basically. So if you're a part of a large statutory body, you would fit maybe into CEO 1. And if you're a part of a medium size, you'll fit into CEO 2. Or if you'll fit into CEO 3, but there's a structure. Because what we found when we were doing our pay and grading review, because we had the information from the statutory bodies, is that, we had known this for years.
Yeah.
Some statutory bodies pay.
It's in the public book. It's
had
in the
far-
budget book too.
Some statutory bodies pay had far outpaced government. So whereas in the public sector, we maybe would have been paying our our administrative staff, we were paying a salary of $28,000 or $30,000 a year. They were paying $45,000, and whereas our permanent secretaries were on salaries of $90,000 a year, their CEOs were on salaries of $140,000 to $150,000 a year. So it's not going to be any loss to any private sector, any statutory body, but we want to ensure that they have a proper structure, because one of the things that I want persons to know about the pay and grading review is that it wasn't a situation where Ernst & Young came in and they said, I believe you should have 10%, I believe you should have 20%, I believe you should have 30%. It was a lot of work, because what we had to do is you had to review job descriptions.
Of course.
You had to look at the qualifications. You then need to look at the market driving factors, like to see what are the push and pull factors for these posts. And that is how you come up with the salaries. And so for the statutory bodies, it's going to be the same, where they will look at the organization, the positions that are included, the job requirements, and then they would set a structure for each salary within the organization. And so we're doing next the statutory bodies. We begin that work in April.
Okay.
Ernst & Young is going to be carrying out that work as well. We will begin first with the Airports Authority, because we know we've had some issues there recently with the staff. And we made a commitment to them that they would be the first statutory body to be reviewed, because we know the pressure points that exist in that organization.
Okay, all right. And I also want to mention the statutory bodies too, because I know it's very unusual, some of the statutory bodies, because I know, for example, years ago, well, I think at the moment most of the positions are occupied by locals, but years ago some of the positions were expired by expats, and so certain salaries were given to them to attract them here as well. And so, of course, those salaries continue. Not saying that the locals don't qualify. So there's a big disparity
There is.
between the statutory bodies and government. I don't know what
Yes.
it is now that the government has done the increase. And I always appalled by that. I always had a problem with it when I see the PSs are making less than these folks at the statutory bodies, the PS is responsible for at the end of the day. I had a problem with that, and I still have a problem with that. So I was very glad to also see an increase for the PSs as well. I mean, because they have multiple roles to carry out.
On average, each permanent secretary is responsible for 10 to up to 18 departments. Different departments, different responsibilities, hundreds of staff across government. They are also accounting officers, which means that they are responsible for the finances that are placed within their remit. They hold personal liability for that. So that means that if they mismanage those funds, it means that they can then be surcharged personally for that. And so they carry significant
Or
responsibility.
they can be personally charged?
They can. They can. You can be personally surcharged if you mismanage the funds. And so the public financial management ordinance is very strict in terms of the permanent secretaries and accounting officers and their responsibilities. And with the statutory bodies, what we have been finding in the past is that every time government did a salary increase, they did one right on the heels of that to ensure that their salaries were always set higher. And so we want to ensure that there's structure across government, because it all has an impact. It's all government monies, whether or not you're subvented or not. Because if you are subvented, it means that we're covering your monthly costs by providing you with that subvention. If you're not subvented, it means that we have vested our assets in you, and we're allowing you to collect funds on our behalf, but it's still the money of the people of the Turks and Caicos Islands. So not because you're not subvented, I mean, the Airports Authority, Financial Services Commission, or other agencies, they still have public responsibilities.
Absolutely. I endorse that. I mean, comment, absolutely. Now, this review also, I noticed, this review also took into consideration review of the parliamentarians.
Yes, it did.
And a lot of people was complaining about that too, because the increase, I think, was averaged like 37%. I can't remember. And a lot of people was concerned about that. But that wasn't originally part of the plan.
It always had to be, because one of the reasons why the public service for many years, I'll say to you that even when we did individual increases in the public service, if we did reviews of certain areas, permanent secretaries and deputy secretaries and so on, their salaries had been stagnant for the past few years, simply because if you reviewed their salaries, it means that it would have put them over the ministers, because the ministers had not had a pay increase, with the exception of the across-the-board increases for NIB and others. The ministers had not had an increase since we returned to elected government in 2012.
I see.
And so you had a situation, quite frankly, where you had the Premier of the Turks and Caicos Islands being paid less than the CEO's salary for many of the statutory bodies. And you are asking someone to run an entire country. You're asking, the public has a right to set certain qualifications for those roles, and I think that that's what the public has to understand, that you have to ask, you have the ability to ask more of your leaders. But when you look at the level of responsibility that you're placing in these persons, you have to make sure that they're appropriately compensated. And so when we looked at the ministers, which had to be a part of the review simply because it would have meant that as you push up the other skills in the public service, you're pushing it over to where the executive, the ministers sit. We had to look at those salaries, but we looked at the compensation packages from within the region. And I'll say to you that even with the new structures that we have now, the Turks and Caicos is still below many other countries in terms
The
of
parliamentarians?
the parliamentarians are still below some of the other countries that have comparable budgets as ours, but it gives them a fair level of pay considering the responsibilities and the requirements of the job set here in Turks and Caicos Islands. We talked a bit about the permanent secretaries and their responsibilities. Well, the ministers and the premier and deputy premier, they have key responsibilities also. So it was an independent review. I'll say this here to say this, that whatever recommendations were implemented, it wasn't a situation where ministers, myself, anyone else sat in the room and said, I want you to give this category more. It was a review that was undertaken by a credible agency. They provided the data. They did a weighting exercise, and so they didn't just say, oh, Turks and Caicos, we want to have salaries like Cayman or Bermuda. We can't, because Cayman has $1 billion budget.
Yeah.
And Bermuda has a different budget from Turks and Caicos. So
And
they
their rate is always higher anyway.
their rate is always higher. So they did a weighting, and they looked at, Turks and Caicos economy, our revenue, our expenditure, our cost of living, and then they set the pay around that.
Okay, all right. Because I know that was, a lot of
Yes.
controversy
Yes.
as well. And
There was no way the ministers and members could have been left out, because otherwise the public service system would have been strangled also, because you wouldn't have been able to move up the public service grades.
yeah, I did a review too, and I noticed. I mean, I look at the Bahamas parliamentarian; they're still making less than us. The Bahamas is making less
So
based
the-
on what I saw.
So yeah, the Bahamas structure, because the Bahamas did share their structure, the Bahamas structure is a bit different, because the Bahamas structure, they receive a salary as a minister. Then they receive a salary as an MP, as an elected MP.
Oh.
And then, yeah, so they have a salary as the minister, but then every person receives a separate salary also.
So they get two salaries.
They
if you're a
basically,
minister.
there's a composition where you have one salary as a minister, and then you also receive a fee basically for being an MP. And then the Bahamas has certain other benefits that they provide in terms of whether it's security, CPUs, cars, housing. So they look at the entire
All
compensation
right, so
package.
I can't just look at the salary by itself,
No, there's
saying
other-
that's the prime minister's salary.
No, they have
He's
other-
also getting a salary as an MP.
He also gets an allowance as an MP, and then he also has certain other benefits that they provide for whether it's accommodation, security, or other travel packages or other support that they provide.
All right. Well, this is good tonight. Thank you for all this analysis of the salary. I'm very glad we're having this discussion, especially those persons who say they didn't see anything or see any major increase. Now, I want to talk about the age, the government's age, the retirement age.
Yes.
60.
Yes, it is 60. So previously, it was 55.
Yes.
The retirement age was 55, and we moved to 60 within the last decade. We moved to the age 60 from 55, because it was previously 55, and we moved to 60. And we know what happened then. When the government moved from 55 to 60, NIB moved from 60 to 65, because NIB said they needed that gap period.
Yeah.
There are significant discussions taking place right now about whether government should increase its retirement age. We have put it to our public sector, and we've had discussions on this in public service meetings, and we will renew those discussions again, but we've had mixed reactions. So I'm going to say to you that persons that are closer, there's a difference between even persons that are closer to retirement. Pre-1992 employees are happy to retire at the age of 60, because their compensation package at retirement is far better than persons that joined post-1992.
Because they're getting both.
So no, post-1992 you receive 6%, but the pre-1992 program allowed you to receive up to almost 75% of your previous salary. And you had the option to convert 25% of that to a gratuity. And so persons that joined pre-1992, and they will retire now based on their new salaries, but persons that joined pre-1992 were happy to retire at 60, because they had already factored that into their retirement plan, and they believe that their take-home pay in some instances, in many instances, is sufficient. There are other persons that are closer to retirement, some that have said that they haven't appropriately prepared for retirement, and they would like to work for a longer period. And so we do consider those on a case-by-case basis if it is in a special category
If they're
where
over
it's
60?
difficult to recruit. Yeah, you can work between 60 to 65 with permission from the governor or myself if it's in a special category that's difficult to recruit, to attract, or if you're carrying out some key responsibility.
Okay. What's that special category? Like teachers?
It could be teachers, it could be nursing, it could be areas that are difficult to recruit, it could be areas where there's a special project, or we're still doing succession planning. So we have had some instances where persons have been extended beyond the age of 60.
Oh, okay. So that's probably because I know I people sometimes say, we sent some people home, we kept some people.
Yeah, so
we send some
it's
people
an
at 60.
individual. It's individual.
Okay.
The retirement age is 60, but if a special case is made by the permanent secretary and so on, then we do look at those cases individually. But then we have persons that are not ready, that want to extend the age beyond 60. And then we have many persons in the public service, especially our younger public servants, that are saying, I joined the public service at the age of 25 or at 30. I do not intend to spend more than 30 years in the public service. And so those persons are not minded to increase the retirement age, but we're also looking at a hybrid program where right now the requirement is that you have to, under the new pension program, well, previously, let me start first with the pre-1992. Under the pre-1992 program before, you had to retire to receive your pension.
Okay.
And so even if you spent 30 years in the public service, but you decided that you wanted to retire from the service at 50, you lost your pension. We changed that. So
You
in
lost your
April,
pension?
you lost it because if you resigned before the age of retirement, you forfeited your benefits. And we have a number of persons that are actually making claims against government now saying that I worked for 25 years and when I left the public service, I received no terminal benefits because the pre-1992 program said I didn't qualify. On April 1st, 2022, we changed, we amended the law to include that once you worked 30 years in the public service, no matter what age you left, you qualified. You get your gratuity right away and your pension began at 60.
Okay.
Under the
Well, that's good.
under the post 1992 program, if you leave the service now, if you retire, if you resign from the service now, but no matter which age you are, you receive 50% of your gratuity. Your well, we call it your remuneration package because
Right.
you can withdraw it in different ways than how it was before. So you can receive 50% now, but you have to have the other 50 at the age of 60.
Okay.
So what public servants are saying is that if you decide that you want to change the age from 60 to, let's say, 65, but I want to retire at 60, I want to receive my money.
So that'll be that'll be an option for them.
So we're looking at a program where we consider whether or not, there's been no decision on it, but we're going to do a review. We'll look at the costings, we'll look at the options, but we'll look at whether or not we increase the age, but also provide those persons that want to leave the service at 60 with the option to do so and to receive, a certain portion of their benefits. Because there are some persons that don't want to work 30 and 40 years for the same organization.
Yeah.
And that's fair.
Now, speaking about retirement, I know this beyond you, but I want to bring it up. A lot of people, they were saying, we'll be sending people home at 60, but the law doesn't prevent parliamentarians over age 60 to go into parliament. And they're saying, how is that fair? We're one arm of government saying you must retire at 60, but politicians could continue after 60.
I hear that argument a lot. I mean, that's not for me because
Right.
my role is for the public service.
Right.
But I think generally, as far as I'm aware, there aren't many restrictions elsewhere on politicians in terms of age.
There probably isn't.
But we know that every country has a retirement age for public servants. Most countries do. There is none for parliamentarians. I think that the reason why is because it's seen that the people will be a judge. So the people will decide who they want to elect as
Absolutely.
their parliamentarians and whether or not they believe the age is suitable or not. Now, whether or not there eventually becomes a restriction in terms of parliamentarians, that's a matter for the members of the House of Assembly to consider. And I know that they are looking at how they restructure the House of Assembly. We are in the midst right now of constitutional amendments. The House of Assembly is going to be changed from the House of Assembly to a parliament. They are looking at adding an additional 4 seats to the House of Assembly, and so the request from the government and the opposition is that there no longer be appointed members and that every member of the House be duly elected.
Right.
The Boundaries Commission has been established, and they will look at whether or not those seats should be all at large or whether it should be a mixture between constituency and at large. But I think in terms of the individual qualifications for the persons that hold those seats, that is a matter for the House of Assembly and for the people of the Turks and Caicos Islands to opine on.
That is true. That is true. But I wanted to throw it out of there because
Yes.
people watching.
Yes, of course.
It's 2 different scenarios.
It is.
It's absolutely 2
It
different
is.
scenarios.
Yes.
And then you knew in advance before you entered government, this is the retirement age.
Yes, yes,
You knew in advance the politicians, there's no age.
yes.
You know that. I think some of us also need to be better prepared. Sometimes we forget when we reach age 60, it's time to go.
So we're doing some more. We're trying to do work with the public service in terms of financial planning. I think
Okay.
financial planning is very key in terms of planning for
Very
your
crucial.
retirement. And we're doing more. We're doing more work on that. But also, we want to begin an investment program here in the Turks and Caicos. I think that that's one of the areas that we currently don't. A lot of persons in Turks and Caicos do not look at investments. Whether it's in the stock markets or in other areas. I know that key infrastructure is being built in the Turks and Caicos Islands, whether it's the ports or the airports. And one of the things that the government has highlighted it wants to do is actually to encourage Turks Islanders to buy shares. And I think that is very important. That's what the Bahamas does. So the Bahamas
Yeah, I
has
know the
opened
Bahamas
up
does
shares
that.
for their ports and so on, that families can purchase block shares. They've made it affordable. So what they've done is that they've made it affordable in that for public servants, they allow you to pay over a payment plan. So it comes out of your salary, but to then say that you have shares in these investments makes a big difference. And I think that will help in terms of retirement planning, because we do find a situation where many persons are very near to retirement, and then we get requests saying, I'm retiring next year, I really can't afford it, I still have a mortgage for the next 3 years, or whatever the case is. And sometimes I think the banks don't help with some of these things, because
Right.
the banks don't help people to plan around their retirement. And then we have some companies that take advantage of persons in terms of their financial shortages. And so you really, really need to look then at how you are able to assist persons to better plan.
And do you think that's realistically going to happen, where the public will be able to participate in purchasing shares in some of these ports, like the ports and the
Yes,
Airports
I believe
Authority?
so. I believe so, because I know the government, I know that
That'd be good.
the last year the government had put aside seed money for the credit union.
Yes.
Remember, every Turks Islander has $500 basically towards their credit in the Turks and Caicos Islands Credit Union. And I know the consultants are on the ground, and they're working to establish the structure. And so before the end of this calendar year, the credit union should be operational.
Oh, that's good to hear.
The government also has, in this recent supplementary that was passed yesterday, actually established a mortgage fund. And the mortgage fund
The mortgage fund was established yesterday
yesterday
in the House of Assembly?
in the House of Assembly. So a mortgage fund was established yesterday in the House of Assembly, where they're going to be putting in place seed funding and sectioning off a portion of, remember, we have the Turks and Caicos Islands Wealth Fund.
Yes.
So an amendment was made yesterday to amend the Wealth Fund to include a separate funding section for a mortgage corporation. And funding will be set aside from the end of this financial year as seed funding for the mortgage corporation to establish that in the next financial year.
That's next week, March 31st.
Yeah. So
That's
you
what that
have,
$7 million I heard
Yes.
they was talking about
yes,
yesterday?
Yes.
Oh,
So
okay.
you have
I
the-
barely listened to it. I was in and off in my radio.
Yes, of course. So you have the credit union that's coming on stream. You have the mortgage fund. The airport is currently at the stage where they've gone through the pre-qualification exercise. We had over 30 interested bidders,
Really?
and there's no capacity for us to review over 30
no.
detailed bids.
No,
So
it's
we've
a lot.
now narrowed that down to 5.
I saw that press release.
And hopefully the contract should be awarded for the airport later within the year. I believe that they now go to the limited tender process, and that'll probably take about 3 months or so, because you have to give those bidders time to prepare. It's a design build contract. But I believe the intention is that that there be some kind of structure, because government is going to retain ownership of the airport.
Absolutely.
But there is going to be some form of a structure that allows persons to possibly, that's what the government had previously communicated. This is not me communicating.
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
This is what they had previously communicated, that they wanted to establish a structure where persons could purchase shares in the airport and also the port. It will take legislation for us to be able to do that, because we've not done that in Turks and Caicos before. But I believe that whichever way the election falls, I believe both the government and the current opposition would support that, because we want to have Turks Islanders, having ownership in our country.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited about the credit. That's something dear to me, the credit union and the mortgage fund. That'll be good to know
Yes.
too. That's coming up in the shares. People purchasing shares. It also, I think, builds a sense of pride.
Yes.
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 Knowing that you have some shares and in this organization, whatever organization it is.
And it helps to build, generational wealth for your family, for
Absolutely.
your grandchildren. I think you have to look at your family and your future offspring and so on. I believe there's a Bible verse that says a man leaves, for his inheritance for his children's children. So
Yeah.
that is what you certainly want to do.
Yeah. How many employees are in the public sector right now?
So currently, the Turks and Caicos Public Service has, in the mainstream public service, around 2,200 employees, and then the police service is separate. They have just over 300, so we have about 2,700 employees across the entire public service.
All right, and of course, this does not include the statutory
This
bodies.
doesn't include the statutory
because
bodies.
they have quite a bit as well.
They have quite a bit. The Airports Authority is the largest statutory body currently. They have a significant number of staff, but that includes just the mainstream public service.
Okay, all right. I want to go back to the statutory, because I know the airport is a big thing. I know you mentioned that the review will start sometime in April, and it has
Yes.
been a very big issue with the sick-out leave and stuff
Yeah.
like the sick-out day. How long do you think this exercise will take Ernst & Young to complete?
So Ernst and Young, I'll be quite honest with you and say that we were very pleased with the work that they did with us in the public service. We were able to undertake the public service review in 6 months.
6 months.
When we did it in the public service, I remember we signed the contract and I said to them, I want to implement this pay and grading review by December so the persons can have their increases for Christmas. And they said, impossible. And I said, no, it will be possible. We're going to do it. And the consultants looked at me like, this lady must be crazy. But we put them on a very tight program. And I think that what I'll say is project management is key. Every week from the day we signed that contract until the day we actually implemented it, we met every Thursday to track progress, to discuss issues and programs and so on, and to make sure that we met our timelines. And we intend to do the same with the statutory bodies. We know it's very critical for the public, for the statutory bodies as well. And I believe that we're going to do the review for all of the statutory bodies within 6 months as well, even sooner if we can. But we start first with the Airports Authority, and then we'll move into the other statutory bodies. But it is definitely going to be completed before the end of this calendar year for sure. And what the government has committed to the statutory bodies is that the recommendations, whatever the recommendations are, they will be back, whenever it's implemented, it will be backdated to April 1st.
Okay.
So there will be no loss because they would have the back pay. In the public service, we didn't back pay. We implemented it effective December 1st. We didn't do any back pay.
Now, in terms of the allowances, I read somewhere where the government had over 20 different types of allowances.
Yes.
How many allowances we have now?
We have significantly cut that number down to below 10. So the allowances that remain in place now is that we still have, of course, telephone and transport for persons that are in certain grades where they're required to use their personal vehicle or for phones and so on. There's no longer a provo allowance. There's no longer a professional allowance because if you're in a certain grade, you're expected to basically have your professional qualifications. We still have in place the Immigration Task Force allowance that's provided to all of our task force officers. We currently still have in place as well. We moved away from the duty and the shift allowance because if you're a prison officer, of course you're going to have to work on a shift system. That's how we operate. So we moved away from most of those allowances. The allowances, I'll be quite frank with you, the majority of the allowances existed in the police. So the police had an allowance the police had a plainclothes allowance if you're a plainclothes officer. They had a shift allowance. They had a band allowance. They had
a band allowance?
Yeah, if you're in the part of the police band.
Oh, okay.
They had an allowance and we increased that also because our band is really great and they're doing a lot of work. So we kept the band allowance, but they also had an allowance for if you're in every area. So if you're a detective, you had an allowance. If you are close protection, you had an allowance. If you're in Marine, you had an allowance. So every area you were assigned in the police, you had an allowance. We've tried to restrict that and to tighten the qualifications so that way you're still able to have some room because imagine that you're a constable, but if you're shifted to a certain area, it does require a bit more from you. So we have kept in place some allowances in the police, but we tried to streamline allowances, as I said, for the main reason that when you leave the service, we want your take-home pay to be similar to what you were receiving.
That's very considerate.
Yeah.
I know it's already the past, but someone asking why wasn't the review, why didn't this review conduct at the same time the public sector review was done when you did the review with
capacity. It was really capacity. Quite honestly, it's capacity because the civil service is very large. You're talking about over 2,000, almost 3,000 employees, and we didn't have the capacity to do the review for the statutory bodies and the public sector at the same time. If we did, it would have meant that our implementation would have possibly been pushed back to April. And because as I said, because we were facing challenges in a number of areas, I mean, I'll be quite honest and say that when we opened schools in September of last year, we had over 60 vacancies because the week before schools opened, we started getting resignations from persons saying, oh, we took up employment in the U.S. or we're taking up employment elsewhere. And we couldn't continue to operate in a situation where we were just losing our employees.
Now, speaking about that, though, because this is happening almost every year.
It does.
Particularly in the education department, where people, I believe most people know.
Of course they
they're
do.
They're gonna on a new job.
Yes.
But they want that salary.
They do.
So, what is the government doing to at least alleviate that situation? Because it's really not fair.
It really isn't fair. So we end up in a situation where, of course, you have to pay persons during the summer period because they're still employees. But we have a situation where just before school opens, we advise, and after payroll, we advise that we're no longer taking up the post. And of course, you knew that before, that you weren't going to be taking up the post. What we've done now to try to alleviate some of that is that we've asked now that before school opens, you have to report to work 2 weeks before. It used to be a week before. We're asking now that you report 2 weeks before, so at least we know who's in place before then. We tried to push August payroll until after that date, so that way we could ensure that we know who's here. But then, of course, our public servants say also school's opening, we need to prepare our children for school. So we try to balance the both as best as we can. But, we ask the persons to be honest and to be professionals, right? If you are going to leave, then say so to us, because we have classrooms that we have to prepare.
So there's nothing in their contract that say you have to give.
There is in their contract. And we always we basically try to go after persons. If we pay you and you didn't serve the time, then we go after you. But if you're living in a different country, it makes it a bit more difficult. But we do hold those records on file also, because what happens is that, and it happens right now. It happened right now where persons left without giving notice or had owed the government monies, but then now they want to come back. And we're saying, oh, you want to come back, but you owe us and so before you can come back, you have to either pay this off or we're going to deduct it out of your salary. And we've done that in a number of instances.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, so if you come back, we keep that on file, and we're going to recover any funds that are owed to us.
I mean, our time is almost up, but I want to ask this question. I know there's a lot of concerns in the public. I personally have a problem with anyone. As long as Turks and Caicos Islanders have a job, they qualify for a job, I have a problem with that. But there's a lot of concern by a lot of people that we have too many foreigners in the public sector when a Turks and Caicos Islander could be in that job. Is that the case, or is it that we don't have enough Turks and Caicos Islanders in the country to apply for that job? Can you give us something about that?
So I will say this here, that I'm a Turks Islander, and I will always put the needs of Turks Islanders first. Quite frankly, because this is my home, this is my country, and we want to ensure that Turks Islanders are able to thrive and to grow in the public service. And during my tenure as deputy governor, when I took on this role, only about 56% of the management structure was filled by Turks and Caicos Islanders. That number is now over 85%. And so,
I did an article on that. I was very, very impressed.
And I think that I've had to prove that to persons by actually I provided you with the full list, so you can look at the name next to the post and see.
I did an article. I think it was almost 90%.
Because people on the outside may not believe that when you say that, but I've actually published it so that people can look at it and see every permanent secretary, every deputy secretary position in this country, which is the highest positions in the public service, are reserved for Turks and Caicos Islanders. And from the heads of departments positions, we have aggressively worked over the years to get Turks and Caicos Islanders into those heads of departments and those deputy positions. And so the majority of heads of department positions and so on, and all permanent secretaries and deputy secretaries are filled by Turks Islanders, over 80%. In terms of the mainstream public service, we have the majority of our positions are still filled by Turks and Caicos Islanders. But I'll be honest and say that we are struggling in technical areas. Because, as I said to you, in our teaching sector, where we're growing, we're developing new schools and so on, you're talking about a teaching sector with over 400 employees. And I will be quite honest and say that the majority of the teachers, I'll say that 50% or so of the teachers now are not necessarily born and bred Turks and Caicos Islanders. But I will say this here to you, that a lot of the persons in that sector are persons that may have come from abroad, but they've been in the system long enough now that they've gained status in the islands also, whether it's PRC or belonger status. But there are some technical areas where we're still struggling. So I'll say to you that in terms of medicine, in terms of the engineering areas, and we're offering scholarships in those areas. And I said recently at the launch of the Special Needs Department that I've said to the Ministry of Education without apology that they need to be stronger in terms of enforcement of bonds. Because we're finding a situation where government is paying for persons to have scholarships in certain areas,
I agree with you.
and they're not returning to the public service. Yes, they may come in and go back to the private sector, but that doesn't benefit me in the government when I still have to recruit. So we've had a number of doctors that would have returned, but less than 50% of them have come back to the public service. They've come back and gone straight into private practice. And we really need them in government. Even if you do a few years in government and then you can decide whether you move on, we need them in government.
But what if government doesn't have a role for them?
We will have roles for them, because if you notify us before, what we will do is then we will have contracts that we will release at certain periods to allow you to be able to come into those roles. And if you don't have the experience, then you can automatically go into the role. We have the apprenticeship program where it helps you to build experience, or we put you into junior roles.
So it seems to me that there's a gap, because there should be a database of all the students who are on scholarship. When the scholarship ends, when the scholarship ends, when their studies end, somehow that should be a database, and so you could know.
So we do have that. We have the database. We know when they end, but the enforcement, because what happens is this. In my time in government, I believe government has probably made about 3 persons pay back their bond because they didn't want to join the public service. And I can be corrected on this, but I'm pretty sure it's no more than 5. I can call the names of persons to you that have paid back their bonds, right?
Yeah.
But the majority of persons come back to the TCI, and if we say we have a job available and they say, oh no, I've decided that I want to go work with XYZ, government doesn't say, okay, now we're going to enforce the bond and you have to pay, because they say, oh, it's a benefit to the country. And we did before say that we want to benefit the country. That is correct. That was our mantra. But right now, we're trying to look at how we build and strengthen the public service. I think the public service has to be the first priority. I mean, I've said this during the launch of the special needs department. I was struggling for years to recruit a behavioral therapist, an occupational therapist, a speech and language pathologist. And we have people that went to school in all these areas.
Really?
But they went to the UK or other places and they never came back to TCI.
Now that's another story too.
Right? And so it's the same thing with engineers. Government has trained several engineers, and then they say to us, oh, and when they finish their degree, oh, I want to stay in the UK for a year to build experience. The year is completed, and then they say, oh, I'm not ready to come back as yet. And by the time that finishes, then they're out of the bond period, and I'm still struggling to recruit engineers. And so if you're going to take up a scholarship, government needs your skills. You have to give your time to the public service. I did it when I finished school. I was on a scholarship. When my scholarship was completed and I came back, I went straight into the chief secretary's office and I said, I'm now here, I'm returning for work. And I joined the public service. I've never regretted it. And so I want other persons to make the government their first choice as well as an employer. And
especially with this recent salary increase. You know, that's a good point you make. Because a lot of times we complain a lot about foreigners taking over our jobs. And some of us don't even want to come home. So if we don't return home to Turks and Caicos, then who's going to take up the job?
Give the government your time, give the country your time, because we're about future building. And that's how we're going to build the future of our islands. We have to be a part of it. We really, really have to be a part of it, especially if you're in the key areas where we really need persons to come back. So most of the majority, like I said, almost over 80% of the senior management positions in government are filled by Turks and Caicos Islanders. We are looking at how we can fill our technical gaps. So we need Turks and Caicos Islanders to pursue studies in these areas. And if you're pursuing studies, we need you to come back home. And I encourage persons as well, if you're having if you come back to the TCI and you feel like you're having difficulty being placed in the public service, I make myself accessible, because some persons will say to me, I called the HR department or I sent in a resume and I never heard back from them. I didn't get a response.
I hear that a lot, though.
If you reach out to me, I will check with our team to see what's going on and try to see how best we can find you a placement.
I hear that a lot. People are at home and they can't find a job. And now, I want to go back to the review, because you mentioned that the review included those statutory bodies that subvented, right? Yes. And that's like
the community college. Well, the community college is in the second. Because
I want to ask, because I see a question from someone in the community college.
Yeah, so the community college is in the second phase of the review, because even though they provided some of their skeleton data, they didn't provide the full data that allowed them to do the full analysis. So they're going to be included.
Not full review. All right, because
they're going to be included.
There's a comment in the chat that the teachers are now making more than the lecturers at the community college.
No, the community college is included in this review that's taking place right now.
Okay. So I want to make sure I cover.
And the sports commission also is in this second phase of the review. Now, the sports commission had a salary review previously, but the sports commission and others will be included in this part of the review.
Got it. All right, perfect. All right, well, I think we've come to the end of our show, and thank you for clarifying and making things better understood about the salary review and about the pension, about the retirement age. Are there anything else that you think you would like to say before we close?
Just to say that the public service has a very important role in terms of delivering key services to the people of the Turks and Caicos Islands on behalf of the government. And that is a role that we take very seriously. We are actively working towards how we increase our service delivery across government. I know that you've seen certain improvements in certain areas. I know everyone keeps bragging right now about the police records and so on, but we've also launched a new business license system online, and that is not,
Oh.
it's actually now in its second year of operation. But I really want to encourage persons to utilize that system, because you ask for online services and then we develop them, but then people are still accustomed to coming into the office. And so I know that this right now is the renewal period for business licenses. You don't have to physically go into the office. You can register online and renew your business license. Certain aspects you can do online. We are looking at how we roll out new programs across government. We're investing this year over $12 million into border management systems in the Ministry of Immigration. We want to have e-borders at our airports. We want to have a new system for border management and work permits and so on, which we know is a pressure point as well. We're looking at how we strengthen key areas across government and how we're able to better deliver services to the people of these islands. I know that you're frustrated in some areas. We're also working with road safety on a new system there. And so we're going to continue to do our best to deliver services to the islands, but we're going to do so in an improved manner because we know the public deserves better. And that's what I want to say.
All right, well, I know I said it was the last, but I have to ask you this question because I'm glad to hear you say there's been improvement made. But a lot of us do not believe, you're the head of the public sector. A lot of us do not believe that the civil servants are being held accountable. What do you say to that?
So I'll say this here, that in my role as deputy governor, I directly manage permanent secretaries and deputy secretaries, and of course I delegate responsibility to them to manage the ministries and departments. And I say this to the PSs and the deputy secretaries regularly, that I say to them, look around the table and tell me who you see is missing, because you are missing some of the colleagues that you started with, because they're on contracts and we don't renew contracts for certain persons if they're not performing and so on. And I've said to them that, it's because, not because you haven't been delivered, because your ministry and so on has not been able to deliver, and you need to hold your staff more accountable. We are, as a part of the pay and grading review, implementing a new performance appraisal system across government, because we do have performance appraisal systems right now. Based on the performance appraisal system that we have, officers are supposed to complete 2 successful appraisals before they can move to their next increment. And each increment gives you a 2.5% to 3% salary increase. But an appraisal system is only as effective as the person that sits behind it. You have to be honest and objective in carrying out your assessment. And it's not about providing the person with a pay increase, it's about ensuring that they're able to carry out the roles they do. And when you complain about someone's performance, but then you give them an appraisal of over 80% because you want them to get the salary increase, you're not helping the organization.
No. And you're telling that person that they're performing.
And you're not helping yourself either. You're not helping yourself, because when your ministry isn't delivering, you're the one that's going to take the responsibility for that. So we are, as a part of our improvements across government, we're implementing a new performance appraisal system, a system that is more simplified. It's an online system that we're rolling out this year, but it's also going to be more about holding persons to account. Because we had the pay and grading review in December, the next increment is not going to be until 2026, because we've just implemented a new system across government. But appraisals are going to be conducted, and they're going to have to be, really strong in terms of the assessment, because this is public funds. If you've invested $18 million into paying the public service, it has to mean that persons are delivering on the money and so on that you're placing in them, and the investment that you're making in the public service. So accountability is going to have to be key, and it is an area that we are working on and we're working to improve. But I can say at my level that I hold regular executive board meetings with my permanent secretaries and deputy secretaries, and certainly they are being held to account.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Appreciate your time. And you've been watching Financially Speaking. Please tune in next week for another segment. And of course, I cannot end without thanking Her Excellency Deputy Governor Anya Williams for being on the show. And based on the feedback and the viewership, it seems like we have clarified a lot of points for you, the viewers. Thank you very much. Have a great week. Thank you for watching Financially Speaking. I'm Drexel Seymour.